TRT make you retain water? It's a very common question on YouTube.
The short answer is yes, initially. The longer answer is that testosterone endogenously is controlled by parts of our endocrine system, primarily the gonads and the adrenals. In women, it is mostly the adrenal, while estrogen is the ovaries. And then in the men, it's mostly the testicles with a little bit of adrenals. There are two organs that are also responsible for water retention and secretion of endocrine hormones, yet they're not part of the endocrine system. One is part of the urinary system, and this is your kidney, and the other is part of the cardiovascular system, and that's your heart. Your heart has specific hormones or peptides. I believe it's a 28-chain amino peptide that's called atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP. And this is a self-regulating mechanism to lower blood pressure if the pressure in the heart becomes too great. It allows your body to release sodium and water in the kidney by releasing this peptide into the bloodstream. And by removing the amount of water in plasma, you're essentially decreasing your blood pressure. This also has an antagonistic effect on vasoconstriction, which also allows to maintain dilation in the bloodstream. So that is one hormone that the heart regulates, essentially, that has a direct effect. Not yet directly affected by testosterone, although indirectly it may be, and I'll explain why in a minute. Your kidneys are responsible for a hormone secreted by the adrenal glands called aldosterone. Okay, I take that back. Aldosterone is actually, it is secreted by the cortex of the adrenals, although the pituitary does control this mechanism. Without getting too deep into the anatomy, your adrenals essentially have the medullary component and the cortex. The cortex is responsible for several hormones. The ones that we're commonly familiar with, which is epinephrine and norepinephrine, are medullary released, which is a nervous tissue. However, the adrenal cortex will release aldosterone, and when it hits the kidneys, it will essentially regulate sodium uptake and with that water retention. Aldosterone is directly affected by androgens. This is another reason people call the bloat from DECA or nandrolone much more severe than testosterone, because nandrolones have a bigger affinity for aldosterone. And when aldosterone goes up, sodium and water are retained. This is why I always tell guys who complain of edema initially that it's not only a temporary spike in aldosterone until everything else balances out, it is essential to maintain electrolyte balance with potassium. It is very easy for us to get in our sodium and then overdo our sodium in a typical diet, because sodium is used in a lot of preservatives and a lot of packaged foods. It's used in a lot of satiatory foods like soy sauces and various different things that we enjoy. Some people have a sweet tooth and some people enjoy salt. So sodium is generally overdone. Sodium will cause water retention, and this is why it's commonly known as blood pressure inducing. Potassium counterbalances salt. So sodium and potassium in our body always move in opposite directions. It's a cellular function of potassium and sodium. Sodium is negatively charged, potassium is positively charged, and they move through a cell membrane by something known as the sodium-potassium pump, right? Very unique and original name. So the sodium-potassium pump will always push sodium out and pull potassium in when they're present at a fair balance. The recommended daily intake, which nobody really gets with potassium, is a 2-to-1 ratio. So ideally, if you're going to consume about 2,500 milligrams of sodium, and most people do more, you want to get in 48 to 5,000 milligrams of potassium, and most people do not do that. A couple of potassium-rich foods, bananas are not really that much, because I think it's maybe 300-400 milligrams in a full banana. You'd have to eat 12 of them a day to really hit that goal. Avocados are pretty decent, and sweet potatoes are very good. And I like sweet potatoes as a carb source for guys who are health conscious and lift, because it's a good, slow processed carbohydrates with good fiber and good nutrients. And it also doesn't spike on the GI index too high. So it's not going to really interfere with insulin too much. But sweet potatoes are a really good source. And if you cannot get in all your potassium, I like potassium citrate, which is a supplement you can purchase. One key note about potassium, in the US, the FDA regulates that a serving size of potassium cannot be more than 99 milligrams. And the reason for that is not for the healthy individual, it's primarily for the people with heart conditions, because too much potassium can actually impact the electrolyte balance in the neurological signals or electrical pulses to the heart, and it can cause MIs or potential other heart issues in certain patients. So because of that, they regulate potassium doses in supplements to 99 milligrams. If I want to take a gram or 1,000 milligrams in my intra-workout drink to balance out my sodium, I'm going to have a hard time taking 10 capsules. So what I like to do is I like to buy a bulk supplement of raw potassium citrate powder, and then I use a scale and I just spoon it up and I give myself as much as I need. So that's just one little tip if you do want to supplement with it. The other one is just eat your avocados and sweet potatoes and keep your sodium levels down. That's going to help with water. And then lastly, drink a lot of water, because our body will retain water. It needs water. And if you're not giving it sufficient level, it's not going to have that natural diuretic effect. So if you want to shed water, you need to hydrate sufficiently so that you are not holding on to too much fluid. You know, there's something called osmotic pressure, where if you have too much minerals, specifically with sodium, the water is going to tend to move in and out of the cells. And when you hydrate sufficiently, you're helping the mineral balance flow as well. So again, it's a lot to do with aldosterone. Some of it has to do with antidiuretic hormone, and then which comes out of the pituitary. Essentially, it's made by the hypothalamus, stored in the pituitary. And then lastly, you have the heart related hormone that help regulate blood pressure via water retention or secretion. So don't pay too much mind to TRT specifically with water retention. 90% of the time, it's going to come down to your nutrition. It's going to come down to your electrolyte balance, hydration level. And once the hormones balance out in a matter of 3 or 4 months or so after you begin your TRT, it's all going to normalize. That initial spike you're getting is because you were probably deficient in a lot of these areas and you're just getting that initial metabolite. Don't sweat it too much. Continue to train, continue to eat properly, and everything else will fall into place.
Something you might not know is that potassium is a Dutch word. You know that?
It's a what, I'm sorry? A Dutch
word?
I did not know that.
It's my language, actually. And the funny thing is, we don't even use it. So we call potassium kalium with a K.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And you use
which
the
makes
Dutch
sure,
word
because
potassium.
hyperkalemia is a potassium, hypokalemia is a potassium deficiency.
Sure.
And essentially, there we go. Now I understand where the medical word comes from.
So we call it kalium, hypokaliemie, hyperkaliemie. So right. Hyper, it's all about kalium, but you guys in the English language call it potassium, which is very funny because it's a Dutch word. It's the ash from a pot.
Right.
It's potassium.
Okay, and as we know, the chemical element is a K.
That's it.
Letter K. And if you think about it, what does potassium have to do with a K? But there you go.
That's it.
You learn something new every day.